Welcome to the first episode of the Landscape Architecture podcast. I'm your host, Charis, and today we have invited Dr. Ervine Lin.
Yes.
So before we introduce Ervine, let's move on to the topic of this episode, which is about passion, and then we'll share more about Ervine's research paper. So maybe before we start, let's have each of the hosts here to use one word to describe Ervine. So Dexter, do you want to go first?
Okay. I think for me, I'll describe Ervine as like the tech guy. Because I remember he's like the guy that like DIYs all like his camera stands and like has all sorts of equipments. And I always see him like going home to like, I don't know, like drill things and play around with all these parts.
Drill things.
Oops, inappropriate.
For me, I would see him as the very free professor. Because not free as in he doesn't do anything, okay? But free as in I feel freedom when I do his, or when I was with him in his module. So yeah, I think he's a really cool prof. I have nothing much to say. I really enjoy his lessons. Yep.
I've only taken you for
1004.
Yeah,
the history and theory, right?
Yeah.
I think all of us here only that module.
Okay.
Correct,
Wait
correct.
till you come to my other module.
Okay. Oh,
Accent Studio.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, Ervine is more like the photographer. So at most of the events, you'll see him with the camera. And then there's like always during final critiques, then you'll see like a camera popping out at the top of the board. Then you know that's Ervine. And I think that's like a very big characteristics about him also, which we'll talk about more in this episode. So maybe Ervine, do you want to introduce yourself also on top of what we have shared?
Yeah, so I am Dr. Ervine Lin. You can just call me Ervine, as most of my students do. I am a father of two. I have a daughter and a son, 7 and 4. I teach landscape architecture to you guys. I specialize in technology, like what Dexter mentioned. But I did teach history and theory. I am no longer going to teach that in the coming semester. Somebody else is taking over. I am a very DIY guy. I have many hobbies that you guys don't even know about. And a lot of them revolve around DIY stuff. And I do drill a lot of stuff at home for some strange reason. What else was there? So I enjoy I enjoy teaching a lot. That's one of the reasons why I came back to teach. I also understand that our profession requires a little bit of freedom. That's what Wayne mentioned. Well, not complete freedom, but within some constraints, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that I highly kind of encourage our students to strive towards, because we are, unlike a lot of other disciplines whereby there is a clear right and wrong or correct and not correct, ours lies in a kind of like a gray spectrum of uncertainty, right? So it's great to have freedom because we are designers, right? Let me see. I'm not sure what else I have to talk about. Oh yes, I just took over as the program director for the Bachelor of Landscape Architecture. So I think it's great that I am also your first guest on the podcast. Hopefully not the last guest.
No, we have more to come. Okay, so when we were preparing this episode, actually someone told us that one interesting fact about you is that you actually got shot.
Yeah.
So maybe share with us more about this interesting
gunshot,
fact.
yeah.
Gunshot.
Yeah, so I'm one of the few Singaporeans that you will ever meet that has actually been involved in a firearm-related incident and lived to tell a tale. I know of a few, unfortunately, that have passed.
No.
So this happened when I was actually a student. I was a master's student. I was doing landscape architecture here in NUS. We went on a field trip to the Philippines. It's very common, at least for the MLA, to go on overseas field trips. So I personally have been traveling a lot because I used to be a photographer. I used to actually like travel photography the most. So I brought along my gear with me because I had the gear, right? And I'm usually very cautious. I still am. But just so happened at that particular point in time, there happened to be somebody who wanted my equipment and my camera, and they took out the pistol and shot me. in order to get to it. So they shot me twice. The first shot basically was a flesh wound. It went through my right thigh and the back of my left ankle. The second shot went directly into my left thigh. It broke it completely in half. And I spent 3/4 of my MLA in either crutches or a wheelchair.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so it took me about 1.5 years to walk again. It took me about another 2 or 3 years to do a triathlon again. And it took me about 10 years to do a one-legged squat again. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you remember how is it like when you first received
the gunshot?
bullet? Like,
I
I heard there were like a lot of like adrenaline stuff where you actually don't feel the gunshot at first.
You hear this a lot from other people as well.
Yeah.
You don't feel the pain. That's absolutely true. I didn't feel the pain. I did feel heat, especially the first shot that went through the thigh. I felt some kind of warm sensation. I'm not sure if that was from the blood or from the fact that the bullet is actually hot.
I think it's the kinetic energy from the gunshot,
Yeah, so interestingly, the doctor was not concerned of infection because he said the bullet is self-sterilizing. Because the moment you fire it out, it's very hot. Therefore, infection from the shot itself is unlikely, but I mean, subsequently. Yeah, so long story short, that's my kind of thing. If you want to find out more, I actually wrote a blog post. You have to Google the guy that was shot no more blogspot.
Yeah, we'll put a link. We'll put a link somewhere in the description. You'll go and find out more about Prof. Ervine.
Yeah, so it's an anonymous blog. You don't see my face, you don't see my name, but that is my story.
It's out now. It's out now.
Yeah. But I mean, on the blog itself, you don't know it's me, right? It's a big graphic, so.
Wait, you posted a picture of the wound?
Yeah, of course. The wound, the X-rays. I think I even have a photo of when in between the two shots. So in between the first and the second shot, I actually accidentally took a photograph.
Conscious to like, okay, I need to take a picture.
Oh no. So that shot was accidental when I was running away. The camera somehow swung behind and took a photograph.
That's okay. That's nice.
That photograph gave me a panic attack actually. The first time I saw it. So I'm talking about it very calmly now because this happened 11 years ago.
Oh damn.
Yeah. Last year I gave a talk to the NUS community about mental health and shared my story on this because the nature of my injury was very physically obvious, meaning to say I was in crutches or wheelchair. So everybody always asked me, how's your leg? Nobody asked me how you're feeling.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is something that I wanted to address, at least in talk, because a lot of the times people who are struggling mentally, they don't necessarily show it. I know of somebody who I always thought was like one of the most happy-go-lucky people I know, but actually he suffers secretly from kind of depressive symptoms. So that's one of the stories I wanted to share, and I'm glad I managed to share it out. I'm not sure how many people tuned in to that though. It was one of those live sharing where I just talked to, and then I'm not sure who else listened in. But anyway, so you can go find the link if they will put it in the description. Just be warned, it's a little bit squeamish if you are squeamish. Yeah.
So maybe Ervine, can you help us break down your studies and your career, and how did you end up being a senior lecturer here?
Okay, so I think I have to go back a little bit in time. I have always enjoyed anything related to design or art. I always wanted to take art, even in my secondary school and JC. But as you guys probably know, if you came from the system, that taking on art is usually frowned upon. You want to go to the triple science and do all the good stuff.
No money.
And only the not academically sound students do art. I was very lucky that in my junior college, the Masak Junior College, they actually allowed it, so I could do science and art at the same time. So I did art as one of my 4 subjects. Probably is my favorite subject amongst the four. I think I did economics, physics, and maths. Yeah, usual
Can't
stuff.
read it.
Oh, yeah,
So it's a H2 art.
I don't know what to
art,
call
not
it. Yeah,
like the art stream.
No, not art stream. Art by as a subject. So basically, my exam was go there and do painting and drawing.
Oh, sounds
Yeah,
fun.
fun. Fun, but at the same time, yeah, once it's examinable,
Yeah, that's
then
where it starts to get a bit
it's not so fun
tedious.
anymore. So I've always enjoyed that. And then when I was looking for courses to take in NUS, you don't take an art course, right? I don't think at that time there were many others as well. So architecture was kind of the nearest kind of other option. So I got into architecture. After an interview, I did actually very well at it. I was, out of the 6 semesters that I was there, I was Dean's List in 5. So academically, extremely well, but I realized very early on that it wasn't what I wanted. It's not that I didn't enjoy design or architecture itself. It's more of the industry that I was very uncertain about. At that point of time, I was also a lot younger and a lot more angsty a person. So there were a lot of things which I disliked or couldn't come to terms with. So I actually took a year off. After my 3rd year as an architecture student, I started a photography business at that time with a partner. I did that for a year. Somewhere along halfway through, the partner left, and then I was left alone. But I decided then that, I don't think I want to go back anymore. So this was, of course, quite a shock for my friends because, you got good student, now wants to drop out. So I just called it quits. So I decided to go and pursue photography. I got a basic degree. I don't think you can do that now, but I got a basic degree after the 3rd year. Then I did photography for 5 years. Just to put that in context, my PhD took less than 5 years. So 5 years is a long time. I did basically everything that paid money, right? So you can't be choosy in Singapore's art market. You could, but it's difficult, especially at the start. So I did everything from graphic design. My focus was space and product photography, but the jobs are few and far in between, and of course they don't pay a lot. My passion was travel and landscape photography. In Singapore,
there's only so much that you can.
There's only so much that you can take. And every time I travel, basically, I am more or less losing money because travel expenses, and then most of the photos you can't sell. So after 5 years, I was planning to get married, and then I kind of I cannot subject my wife to this kind of life anymore. So I was looking at the options. There were 2 options that came to me. The first was, I just go be art teacher. So I applied. I applied. I got the contract, but at the same time, I actually applied to be to the MLA scholarship. So by chance, at that point of time, the MLA just started. And by chance, my parents saw it in the papers, and then by chance, they were like, hey, why don't you go and try? So I applied for it, I got a scholarship, and then it was exactly at the same time. So I was offered a scholarship and the art teacher position. So I was like, okay, so take the scholarship because that might take me further. So I did my MLA, got shot in between, graduated from MLA. I didn't take any time off. I think I just was on MC for, what was it, 2 weeks or something?
Huh?
Yeah.
2 weeks for you to recover?
No. 2 weeks, and then I was
subsequently
good enough to 2 weeks or a month, I can't remember. But I didn't take a whole semester off. I still continued, so I didn't lose any time. And then towards the end of my MLA, I was offered a PhD position at the Singapore ETH Center. So basically, it's the research institute that is from ETH Zurich, but kind of housed here. I originally turned down the invitation not because it was a good opportunity, but because it involved me traveling to Jakarta, Indonesia, because the project was based there.
Oh, that's with the Jakarta, that research
Is it
paper
with
that you...
Kenya?
No. That's
That was
after,
a
much
separate
after.
project, I see.
The Kenya's one is much later. So what I did was, okay, I go and research on this river that we're supposed to do research on. And that was when I had my second panic attack. So the first one, like I mentioned earlier, was when I saw a photograph that was accidentally taken, and this actually photographed part of my assailant. The second panic attack I ever had was when I was Google Earthing the river. I was shot on a bridge over a river by a person that was riding a motorcycle. So these are very specific triggers that for me at least back then. So when I was Google Earthing, Street View, and then I went to the river on a bridge, and then of course there was a motorcyclist in the image, and I got my second kind of mini panic attack. So I was like, I don't think I can do this, because I had to physically go there, I had to physically travel. And I think at that point of time, I just was able to walk again, right? So I originally turned it down. Then I decided to seek professional help to kind of accelerate the healing process. So I went to the university's counseling center. Thankfully, I managed to find a counselor who is non-local, so she kind of understood some of the PTSD symptoms. She gave me a few books, some pointers, and then I realized that it's something that I can overcome, and I could use actually that opportunity in Jakarta as part and parcel of my recovery journey. So eventually I did it. I accepted it. I went to do my PhD. I think it took me 3 or 3.5 years. And then I got my doctorate. But because I was a scholar for my master's, I went back to NParks to kind of work as a researcher for 3+ years. I enjoyed my time there. I think it's fantastic work that the guys in NParks are doing. But I wanted to be an art teacher. So I reached out to the program director for the MLA at that point of time was Dr. Tan Poe Yok. And then he said, yeah, we're looking for people, please come and apply. So I applied. And then here I am. So I've been here 3 years now. This is my third year going forth.
So just to add on to your questions on, I just heard you took a gap year to start a business, right?
Yes.
So actually, this is a really interesting question, because there are a lot of students who in university or in courses still believe that what they are doing is not what they want, or what they are not passionate of, or still finding a passion of. So did you feel that pressure when you saw when you had to leave your classmates to go and take that gap year? What were your thoughts like? How do you feel, and how do you overcome that pressure of that sort of stereotype? If you
so you're saying that a lot of people think that they're not in the course that they are.
So they tend to get pressured by not leave the course because they are about to finish or whatsoever, or like they don't want to waste their money or their time or whatsoever.
Firstly, I'm not stupid enough to leave without a degree, right? So firstly, if you've already spent 3 years, you jolly well get at least a degree, right? 3 or 4 years, whatever it is. So you kind of cut your losses short. It's a calculated risk, but it is a risk. I'm still, in a way, paying back for that risk that I took and the decisions that I took, because I have peers who went along and they are probably better off than I am now in terms of maybe where they are in the industry or their positions or whatever it is. So there is a risk and there are consequences to taking such risks. But if it's causing you dismay, if you can't sleep at night, if you know that you are deep down, you're going to suffer in the long run, then just cut your losses short. We did have a few students who left our course, the BLA course, but they left very early. And my suggestion to them was, if you're sure, then I'll give you my blessings, because I did that too at yeah, I don't think it's the wrong decision for me, right? So if you are one of those students who is unsure, firstly, you need a backup plan. Things are also getting really expensive in Singapore.
Yep, inflation.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I was confident of leaving back then was HDBs back then, BTO $150,000.
Oh,
Much cheaper.
Now it's something like 400, half mil. You're looking at some even 1 mil. So those very, very serious, down-to-earth decisions were also things that I took into consideration. I consulted with my then girlfriend, now wife, and of course, parents being parents will never say yes to this kind of thing. But yeah, my parents did give me their blessings in a way. So yeah, it's a calculated risk that you have to take. My advice is get into the right course from the onset. Especially so for courses like ours, whereby it is highly focused,
Specialized.
highly specialized. Yeah, the wiggle room is not as diverse as a more general degree out there.
I get asked a lot. It's like when people ask like, what's the difference between Archi and landscape Archi?
Yeah.
So usually like for me, the very layman term that I tell them is just, oh, Archi does like buildings, then landscape is like probably like the spaces around it.
Yep.
Yeah, so maybe you can give us like a more in-depth or because you have like the greater insight into this.
Yeah.
Okay. So both are design disciplines. Both of them happen in the built environment. So that's kind of the commonality behind them. One of the biggest differences is that our canvas and muse tends to be more leaning towards the natural side of things. So by canvas, I mean like the land that you develop your landscape on, the palette that you use. So for example, the natural materials that you use. And of course, most of the time, most forms of architecture shield you from the elements. In landscape architecture, you don't shield yourself from the elements. It's not physically possible, right? So you kind of embrace it as part and parcel of your design process. So the design approach is slightly different. The scales are different. And some of the rigor in which we go into are also quite different. So I found that a lot of our students are a little bit lacking in construction knowledge, which is why we have landscape construction modules, or even simple, understanding about how things are put together, right? But you have to have that because we are, like I said, in the built environment kind of industry. Landscapes are built. They are not just pen and paper. They have to be constructed. So that rigor of understanding the construction process is something that is a little bit, I think, lacking in our earlier year students. Hopefully, by the time they get out, it's slightly better. So that's kind of like what I see as the main differences. And if you are interested in design and you're not sure kind of which one to go towards, you kind of have to reach inside and decide for yourself whether, I'm more like an outdoorsy guy, nature lover guy, or I'm more interested in form making and internal space making. I'm more interested in the built environment, literally, or I'm more interested in the outdoor spaces. So students who understand these clear differences tend to figure out quite easily, which of these they are interested in. So the other point that you raised was I jumped from one to the other. It's much more difficult to do so now. A couple of years back, it was still possible. You could kind of decide after your first few years in architecture to kind of split.
Like a form of specialization back then.
Yeah, kind of like specialization, and then after that you do the MLA. Right now, we split it right from the start. So even in year one, it's no longer architecture. Everybody is architecture, and then we split. We split it right from the start. So the choice is extremely important. So for any of you out there who are applying to NUS, the choice of which goes into the first and the second slot are extremely critical. Extremely critical, right? So please think about that very carefully, right?
Right.
For me, I actually have more questions about like you taking an LOA.
Yeah.
And then, like, how do you know, where do you draw the line between like, I like something versus I'm passionate about something that you will actually want to take an LOA for?
So you guys know in our course that we spend a lot of time on our design, right? Much more so than I think we should. right? So the difference between I think passion and kind of like I'm okay with this is that when you spend that amount of time and energy on something, and you're still okay with it, you're like, I spend so much time and energy on this because I enjoy it, I like it, I want to make it better. That is passion. If it's something that you don't really enjoy, you'll be like, I just want to do it so that I can submit it on this deadline and then I'll be done with it, right? You can move that bar up and down depending on whether or not you like a subject matter, right? So if you're really passionate about something, the amount of energy and time that you spend is disproportionate to, I think, the kind of returns that you get from a more simplified point of view.
There's some wisdom there that I think everyone, regardless of what industry you're in or like any course you're in, you can like understand and learn from. So another question is like, why photography or like digital aspects of like landscape architecture?
Okay, for photography first, probably. I think the same reason why so many people are doing photography now, it's one of the easiest
To make money.
No,
Really not.
You see our Instagram is like,
the barriers of entry are very low,
Right.
right? That barrier of entry being so low makes it very easy to enter the industry. There is no standard or professional qualification. Even though I was a professional photographer, I was in the Society of Professional Photographers. But yeah, you can do, nowadays you can do like TikTok and then still earn tons of money from it. So it was the easiest to enter. At that point of time also, I did have an interest in it. I was in the Hall's photography club. I was in the motion graphics club, right? So I did, yeah, so I had an interest in that, this kind of
Setup.
So I had the interest in that. So that was one of the things. And then of course you can kind of make some money out of it, offering services. As to the digital side of things, it's just also inherent in me. So some people like philosophy, some people like history, some people like medicine. I like tech and geeky stuff. So if I ever took you online in one of my modules and I happen to be at home, like sitting next to me is actually a 3D printer. Right on my left is 3D printer. And then I have another 3D printer in the backyard, and then I have like a dry cabinet full of cameras also on my left. So it's just part and parcel of me. I'm this geeky guy that has always been interested in working in 3D, and it's just that I also like design and art and stuff like that. So I'm trying to fuse in a way these two interests and worlds of mine, at least in the teaching that I do here in NUS.
I think people who are always very passionate about like artistic things, then they always question themselves like, how am I gonna survive on this if this doesn't actually fit my family or anything? So have you had that kind of dilemma, and how do you try to overcome it?
You know the term "eat grass, 吃草." So in the 5 years that I was a photographer, I essentially that was my So every day I would eat the same meal, almost every day. So I'll just go downstairs. I had a photography studio back then. I just go downstairs to the nearest store, and then every day I'll eat the same meal. And I was always like month by month kind of scrape by. But again, this is Singapore. Times are difficult. It's still possible if you're willing to lower your expectations in other areas of life. But my wife was doing extremely well. She is still doing extremely well. So I couldn't bring myself to,
Financially dependent.
Either financially dependent on her or financially so kind of disparate from her that I don't feel right. Not being,
just a personal
manly or whatever it is, but it's just not right lah. So I wanted to pull my own weight, and of course then I had to go and look at the other options. But it is very difficult. The artistic kind of enterprises in Singapore are tough industries to survive in, and you have to be very careful, or either that or very good at marketing yourself. I don't think you even have to be very good at the art form or the skill itself. I think you need to be much better at marketing yourself. And I'm a terrible businessman. I'm the kind who will just sit down there and hope and pray that jobs will land my way. And of course, they didn't in the quantum that I needed them for me to stay in the industry. Yeah, so I, again, make a decision to cut my losses short after 5 years. Not to say that I didn't learn anything. Like, I now instinctively pick up my camera and I can take good photos. Most of my photos, 99% are of my kids, but they're nice photos of my kids. And then, Photoshop to me is like second nature, like riding a bicycle. Like go on to it, I don't really think about it because I did that 5 years, like day in, day out.
So what about, we actually, when we were researching about this, so we actually read like a Straits Times article about 7 out of 100 architects will stay in the profession long term. So 7 out of 100 is actually a very
small
low,
percentage.
very small percentage. So what kept you going in the landscape industry?
I have to be honest with you, I have not been physically in the landscape industry. By that I mean a practitioner. So I've been in the academic side of things, I've been in the research side of things, probably in the government sector side of things. So my view is a little bit different from somebody who is planning to go into practice. I also think that there are differences in the architecture and landscape architecture disciplines. We don't have the stats for landscape architecture as to how many people left. But just a quick sensing of at least our MLA graduates, many more retain in the industry, much more. I would say maybe 50%, half or more, which is much more healthy than 7-10%. But that's it. I mean, I'm just anecdotal evidence. Like, I don't know the full depth of it.
There's a bit of hope there.
Yeah. As to why this is so, I really don't know. I know that a lot of people who are in the landscape industry tend to remain very passionate about it in one way or another, which is why we can kind of attract people who come back from the industry to teach, not because they want a second source of income, but because they believe in the industry, they believe in...
Very close community.
Yeah, it's very much smaller than architecture.
Yeah,
Architecture is small, we are even tinier. So I think they believe in the role landscape plays in bettering our environment, bettering society, and they kind of want to spread that message along. So that's one of the things that I think. As to architecture itself, again, it's not for everyone. So I had a friend who got married to an accountant, and the joke was that he found somebody in the industry, that was at another industry that worked longer hours than us. So accountants work also really long hours, probably lawyers and some others as well. But yeah, we work really long hours. The remuneration has not been kind of on par with other disciplines as well. That's a lot of the complaints that people get. And it's a lot of work, right? Because it's again not, it's not a clear-cut thing whether this is correct or wrong. It becomes much more complicated. And also the design aspect of it in the industry is a much shorter component to the entire construction process, right? So the fun part is actually reduced to a much smaller duration. But again, that said, I know also of ex-classmates of mine who were never fantastic designers, but they're fantastic architects because they're very good at management. Project management, they're very good at talking to clients, they're good at getting business, they're good at the business aspect of things. So if you're in a design discipline and you're not good in design, doesn't mean that you will fail in the industry. You just need to find which part of the industry fits you a little bit better. And I think in design disciplines, we tend to ignore that a little bit. We kind of like, design studio, it's number one goal, everything else should be secondary. I don't think that is the case moving forward. In fact, one of the biggest changes that we are making at the university level is to allow our students to create your own degree. Right? So I'll explain a bit more during the orientation. But essentially, right now for the incoming students, I think even in your batch, your year 4, you can do completely something outside of landscape.
Okay.
Every single module in year 4, you can do something outside because they're all unrestricted electives. So you can, of course, stay with us if you are really passionate about the industry, but that's not to say you should or you want to, right? Why should you not? Let's say if you decide for yourself, oh, I really love landscape architecture, but I really like planning as well. So you could divert your module resources into some planning modules instead. You still graduate in the same BLA, but in your transcript you will show that I have an interest in this. And then maybe you can go to URA to work, or some of the larger firms whereby they have a planning arm, right? You could decide, I really like the ecology or the geography aspect of things, and then you could again kind of manipulate your modules towards the end, towards some of these directions. Right? So this wasn't available back when I was a student. You go into architecture, you come out as an architect, or at least that's the trajectory that you are kind of expected to follow. And what this again allows is for you to decide for yourself, usually at the later years, whether or not this track is the correct one for me. And you don't lose time because you still graduate with your bachelor's, but you spend some of that last few semesters doing something that maybe you are truly interested in. But with great flexibility comes great responsibility.
Okay.
Right?
Spider-Man.
So you need to go and decide for yourselves, and we can only offer, this is what we have in our quiver. If you're not interested in this, you have to go and find something else yourself. Right? We cannot kind of decide for you. And that's something that is both a pro and a con, depending on what kind of a student you are. And I do hope that our students appreciate this flexibility, because it is absolutely mind-blowingly complex on our side to allow such flexibility, right? So I'll explain to you a little bit more when in the coming orientation. You will see for yourselves how flexible it can actually get.
Yeah, so this is actually part of my understanding about school, and is that when I come to school, right, I will mainly just want to focus on whatever I'm doing, So let's say right now I'm doing landscape architecture, I want to do everything related to design. But then I realize as you are going out into the industry, you really need those variety of skill sets for you to really survive. And yeah, I think that's really the good thing about university in itself, right? That is for you to discover and broaden your skills and whatsoever you want to do. Yeah.
So I don't think it's even limited to whatever you do in the university. So I became a photographer not because I took a photography class. I had an interest in it. I took CCAs, ECAs outside. So I don't think it's just limited to classroom learning, right? Certainly it will help. But yeah, I would highly encourage you to kind of broaden your horizons as much as you can.
I think that's the fun part about uni. So you get to go to modules like hosted by other faculties, then you meet other people. So you actually share, like most of us in Archi, then we'll always like rant about certain stuff, or like just
model making.
Model making, or like just similar topics. But then if you go and talk to like another person from business or even geography, art school or anything, then they have different things to complain about. And then you just start to realize that there's actually more topics you can touch on. And even in NUS, I think there's like some UI, UX design or any other form of designs. So if you're interested in design, you don't just have to learn about landscape or archi stuff. You can do more other than that.
And there's just, the onus is on you to go and find a lot of these and plan for them such that it fit nicely. And yeah, it's quite crazy now, the amount of flexibility that is being offered.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the landscape archi case studies. So for Ervine, we've actually chosen, he actually sent us a few of his papers about BIM. So maybe do you want to share a bit, what is BIM first?
So BIM is short form for Building Information Modeling. It's a different mode of operation when it comes to the design and construction of built landscapes. It's something that has been pushed to a lot of curriculum in all disciplines revolving around the built environment. So architecture, definitely they talk about it. In all the poly courses, there is some kind of BIM exposure, either Revit or something else. In fact, more and more so, even in the industry, people are asking for it. In fact, in some cases, it is mandatory, especially in the architecture side of things. Unfortunately, for landscape, it isn't there, right? There has been very little movement internationally to move towards adopting a BIM kind of workflow. So the problem I see with this is that the idea of BIM is not software, it is workflow, right? So if landscape architects are not embedded into the BIM workflow, they are not at the table when these discussions are made. Right, so when discussions between the landowner, the developer, the client, the architect, the engineer are happening in that BIM environment, and landscape architects are still falling back to their hand drawings and 2D AutoCAD, we are not at that table. We have to be at that table to make these discussions, right? You have to be able to produce your material in that same BIM environment to say, hey, no, you cannot put your beam there. I have a tree that's going to be placed there. I need my root ball to be this big. I need that amount of soil volume. That beam has to be moved, right? These kind of conflicts that are supposed to happen, are supposed to be resolved in this BIM environment, cannot be resolved if you are not at that table with them at this point of time. So the problem that I'm facing is, how do we incorporate that as both a component of our teaching in NUS, but also in the industry itself, to kind of spur them forward towards adopting some of these ideas. So this project that I believe you're referring to is the development of a vegetation library.
Yeah.
And this was formulated when I was still working in land parks. Back then, my opinion was that there needs to be a centralized vegetation library hosted by one entity in Singapore that is beamable, beam-fiable, whatever you want to call it. So everyone will just draw from this library because that is the central depository, right? And it makes sense because vegetation doesn't really change, right? Your tree will be the same species, it will be roughly the same kind of size. So there's no need for you to have different versions of it in different libraries in different firms. Right? Everyone should be just drawing on the same one. And this also has repercussions down the road when there are things like submissions to authorities, whereby if you had something unified, then they could reach towards this unified library to check certain things like GMPR or things like that. So that's what I believe, but at present, I still don't think it is happening yet. So if you do my year 4 MLA 1 module, we'll be introducing some ideas of BIM, but we won't go so far as to kind of force you to do your entire project in BIM. Partly also because the software that is available have never been designed for us. There is one, but after some kind of testing, I'm like, yeah, this is not really going to work. So it's unknown. Everybody is not sure how exactly to kind of push forward for it. And that project that I had was my own kind of my own way to kind of push the industry towards kind of adopting this. Unfortunately, at this point of time, it hasn't been officiated. There's still no official centralized BIM library for vegetation in Singapore. But I'm seeding it into the students because the students will then go on into industry and then they will spread it and seed it. So that's kind of my approach now. And instead of a top-down thing, I'm going to try to inculcate it into our students, to let them see the benefits of it, and also have them have that kind of confidence to say, yes, it's unknown territory, but the benefits are way more than the kind of the complications of kind of learning it now. So it requires a multitude of actors coming together, but I'm approaching it now from the academic side of things, trying to introduce some of these ideas to students, and hopefully the industry will start picking it up.
I think it's a good example to show that landscape architecture is not just about practicing, being like the architect who's actually built stuff like Skyrise Garden or anything. It's also good to see that we have academics behind who's like pushing for research papers out, and then like seeding, teaching like the future generations more about landscape and how we should, carve our path. Yeah.
It really helps to like challenge, firstly, like the stereotype around the profession. I mean, a lot of people think that we're just gardeners, but I
Yeah.
think there's more to that lah.
Yep.
I think also it helps to challenge a lot of actions being done. I mean, like, okay, because when I was reading your papers, I mean, you talk about trying to push this because right nowadays there's like this skyrise greening thing that we're pushing for, and like GMPR, this kind of thing, to ensure that there is that for every built space, you still have vegetation within like the built environment. Then I do agree what you mentioned in your papers, whereby you say that using a form of, as in sort of like test the effectiveness of these plants, whether do they really prove to be effective for like their cooling or their microclimatic effects.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and someone you also mentioned that it's pushed for during the design phase.
Yep.
So I mean, rather than, so you can really prove its effectiveness early, rather than once you construct,
Yep.
then all these problems start to come up.
Yep.
And I think it's also a very good point because, I mean, during our modules, like, we also do question a lot of things like whether what we do in our greening efforts, be it in the country or elsewhere, like, is it just greenwashing, or is there really a concrete evidence to say that, okay, what we do here is really effective?
Yeah. So you guys were with me with the history and theory module, and one of the topics that we talked about when we went to skyrise greening specifically was we cannot just do greening for the sake of greening, or rather, we cannot do skyrise greening for the sake of skyrise greening, right? And unfortunately, that's kind of like what I see that's happening. Like everybody is just slapping on more and more green without thinking about what are the not just the positive effects, but there are negative consequences.
There's implications behind all this.
Right, the construction costs and maintenance costs, etc. So there are implications, and you have to kind of weigh both sides. So one of the reasons why I'm a bit of an advocate for doing this at the design phase is because, can you imagine if an engineer was to come to you like, I just build it, like, after we build it, then we test. Right?
We're too late by then.
Or an architect will be like, yeah, we just do after that, then we check whether it is sound or not. No, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
So how is it when it comes to greening? We can be like, yeah, you just put some trees there. Oh,
It's like quite a substandard thing.
yeah, job done. So how can you be assured that it's supposed to perform in a particular way? So there's actually a branch of science called landscape performance that looks into this. A lot of it is still post-analysis of performance, not pre-analysis. So I believe that it should be during the design phase. So if you are designing ABC waters, right, I want you to show me through simulations, through some calculations, through something that you are going to achieve what you say you will achieve. Right? If not, then it's just Photoshop, right? Your Photoshop versus your Photoshop versus your Photoshop.
Just make it look nice.
Whose Photoshop is better, right? So it doesn't make sense. And to me, from a perspective of reaping the most benefit out of built environments, the reason also because it's not like nature where it's just there and nobody paid for it. Somebody is paying for your landscape, right? And you need to both convince your client, and I think more importantly, convince yourself that you are doing good, right? Because if not, then what are we doing if you're not doing something good, right? So it's something that I highly believe in, but we are so far away from that goal. I sometimes just think that I'm just talking to myself. Because
No, it's okay. And especially with this podcast, I'm sure we have reached like a wider group of audience,
hope to reach
and then
wider.
also to the students ourselves. So
Yeah.
I think with this sharing, I want to thank Ervine for being here with us today. And actually, we learned a lot about your life, about passion, and also about your research paper. So thank you very much, Ervine, for being our first guest.
okay, very welcome.